Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are. And welcome to today's workshop dedicated to ethics review preparedness during COVID-19 challenges and lessons learned. My name is Farah Asif, and I will be the chair for this workshop. I'm the secretary to Institutional Review Board at Shaukat Khanum Memorial Cancer Hospital and Research Center, Lahore, Pakistan. Before we begin, we will run through some housekeeping rules. Firstly, please be aware that this session is being recorded. The recording will be shared with a link by email in the coming days so you can review materials and share with wider colleagues. Please turn off your video and microphone so that we can maintain quality and enable everyone to focus on the session. We will let you know when and how to use your video and microphone during the interactive parts of the session. To interact with the panel, please use the chat function, which you can find in your toolbar at the bottom of the screen. If you have any technical issues, please let us know in the chat, and the Global Health Network team will aim to assist you. If you would like to ask a question verbally, please raise your hand during the question and answer session when indicated to do so, but we strongly encourage you to use the chat box. We have dedicated session for question and answer today, when we will try to get through as many questions as possible. If we don't have time for all of your questions, we will save them and try to provide written responses along with the recordings. At the end of the workshop, we will share an evaluation form in the chat box. We will be grateful if you could complete this. This form will also be emailed to you. So having said that, for those who were not able to join on Monday, this webinar is brought to you by the Global Health Network in collaboration with the coordinators of COVID-19 Ethics and Community Engagement Working Group. The workshop aims to examine the ethics review process, identifying the variations and the challenges that present. This session seeks to provide an opportunity for ethics review bodies or institutional review boards to share and discuss the problems and potential solutions afforded by experience so far in an effort to ensure a more coordinated and efficient review system. On day one, we were joined by more than 100 attendees with diverse backgrounds who participated actively and helped us identify a large spectrum of challenges and the adaptations that they have done in their settings as a response to these challenges. That was the amazing part of day one. So today we are looking forward to explore some potential solutions as well. We will now begin the program for today. We are very fortunate to have 3 case studies exploring the challenges faced during COVID-19 pandemic. Questions to our panelists will be taken after the break during the discussion panel. So I would like to welcome our first speaker, Roxana Rezango, an attorney from Peru, who is the past coordinator of Peruvian IRB network, current member of the Peru National COVID-19 IRB, and member of the Program Committee for the World Conference of Research Integrity to be held in 2022 in South Africa. She will be speaking about the constitution of an emergency review panel for COVID-19 research in Peru. So I would welcome you, Roxana, and looking forward to hear you. Thank you.
So I am a member of the Peru National Transitory COVID-19 IRB, created for the purposes of promoting COVID-19 clinical trials by allowing for rigorous, timely, and compliant review of clinical trials. These are my disclaimers. Even though I'm Peruvian, I have worked for the United States, for a United States institution since 1986. I head the regulatory office in my institution, which conducts research in tropical diseases in the Latin American region. So in between March and April 2020, the Pan American Health Organization launched a series of documents to provide guidance and to provide operational uh, paths toward improving review and making it rigorous and making it compliant. In order to improve the quality of the review, but also in order to meet the very difficult timelines that every country was facing with the disease. In Peru, the government of Peru, issued a supreme decree, which is the highest form of regulatory guidance, mandating that all COVID-19 clinical trials were to go through this national transitory COVID-19 IRB. Local IRBs which existed and had been registered and accredited by our regulatory office in Peru were not to be reviewing or approving COVID clinical trials. All of the clinical trials would go directly to this national IRB, which was set up in early April. The essential elements, according to the PAHO guidance documents, were time, rigor, and ethics. And the documents provided very clear guidelines on how to achieve these essential elements. The guidance, and we followed in Peru, we followed the guidance with very clear details, asked for flexibility and alternate mechanisms for review, because as you can imagine, everything went virtual. Peru went into lockdown in around the 10th of March, so everything had to be done virtually. The guidance also recommended efficient communication and harmonization of criteria between the IRB and the health authorities. And that is what was done in Peru. We worked very closely with the Peruvian regulatory agency and with the Peruvian Ministry of Health in order to ensure that they understood our processes and that we received the support we needed as a national transitory IRB. We also worked our procedures. We were provided with a list of procedures by a regulatory body, and we updated and adapted them as to our needs in order to make sure that our reviews were adequate. Now remember, because we in Peru, we have a national COVID-19 IRB, the other IRBs are not participating. There's just one single review for COVID clinical trials. And it also called for improving coordinations between the national IRB and the regulatory bodies, which has been done. I think that one of the big issues that allowed this national IRB to become operational and to become active immediately was the presence of a Peruvian regulation for clinical trials. Peru has had one since 2006. It has recently been updated 2017, but because of this Peruvian regulation for clinical trials, um, the regulatory agency in Peru has a list of registered and accredited IRBs, a list of trial sites that have been opened before and have been visited and authorized by the regulatory body. We have a list of CROs and we have a list of sponsors. So the setting for clinical trial conduction in Peru existed before this national IRB. Now, the other good point about this national IRB was the fact that it was created by a supreme resolution. That is by the highest body in government, in mandating that all of the trials went through this national IRB. And we, as a national IRB, are only going to exist until the emergency exists. The day the emergency is lifted, this COVID IRB will stop functioning and all the duties will be distributed among the existing IRBs. Another good factor in Peru was the fact that the regulatory body in Peru also called for a registration of non-clinical trials, non-COVID, uh, uh, of COVID non-clinical trial research. So in addition to having clinical trials registered, we also have a registry of COVID non-clinical trials in the as part of the regulatory. So I think that the existence of a regulatory system in a setting for clinical trials helped this national IRB to fulfill its duties. Constitution of this type of body as a national IRB in an emergency setting is crucial. And I think this was also a very important step taken by the regulatory authorities in Peru. They did not select the members per se. They asked the existing IRBs to provide a list of interested members who were willing to participate in this national transitory IRB and who were willing to put in the time and the commitment required to do a rigorous job in a timely setting. And so local Peruvian IRBs provided with a list of members. That means that the members that came to this national IRB had experience, had training, and had commitment, which are all of the main requisites. Another good point, and this was done in the selection of the members by a regulatory body, because the IRB is provided with a list and the national regulatory agency chose from within that list, was a very diverse background. You can see an intensive care physician, a cardiologist, public health, etc. But at the same time, these members had Ministry of Health hospital experience, which during the review was essential because they could tell us what was happening in our hospitals due to COVID and what was feasible as part of a research procedure and what was not feasible. In addition to experienced IRB members and members committed, we also had and continue to have a wonderful administrative secretary who is very well versed with clinical trial procedures, but also with ethics in research guidelines. So the help is complete. It is so having that type of support was crucial. In regard to streamlining the review, in addition to the IRB composition, which I just mentioned, they talked about making our requirements more flexible for submission. That meant that in some cases, we could start the review with some of the documents, not with all of them, while the rest of the documents were being completed. And that was done. It proved to be a lot of work, a lot more work for the IRB, but it worked. It allowed us to meet with the tight deadlines that were very important during this COVID emergency and continue to be very important. Oversight of research was also an issue that I will briefly mention in a few minutes. And a new issue for us was trying to discuss with the current principal investigators and collaborating agencies about the need for material transfer agreements when they were planning to store samples for future use and ship them out of Peru. And of course, information technology was crucial. Without that, there wasn't much we could do. So in streamlining the review, we had a huge issue. Our timelines were very tight. We had 1 day between the protocol arrived and was sent to the reviewers. We had 3 days for reviewers to conduct the review. That meant between During the day the package arrived, we had 3 days to schedule the meeting because it was 3 days for the reviewers to conduct their review. And then we had just about one day to communicate with investigators right after the meeting to provide them with the observations. And then the investigators had 2 days to provide responses. So everybody was tight. But what do these tight lines mean for IRB members? Number one, IRB members, I think it was also said on day one of this workshop, are all pro bono. All of these people have full-time jobs and they are not making any money for being IRB members. And these tight deadlines and sometimes meetings every week required long reading hours. We calculated that in preparation for each meeting, we dedicated between 8 to 12 hours each member between reading the protocol information, which is never just the protocol. It includes the brochure and it includes many other additional documents. Between reading the protocol, training yourself on what that means, and trying to understand the fast track processes in COVID-19 research, it took between 8 to 12 hours to be ready for an IRB meeting. It was training time, meeting time, and the review of IRB actions because it didn't stop with the approval of the protocol. That was pretty much the beginning of the action because after the approval of the protocol, we had unexpected problems, we had adverse events, we had a review and approval of materials for the advertising campaign that they wanted, that investigators wanted to do in various sites, and all of that needed to be reviewed and approved by the IRB. And it has led us to question ourselves how sustainable this type of, of efficiency can be. On top of that, if I may, when you choose IRB members, the selection process in Peru was dual. It was first by the existing Peruvian IRBs providing their members, and by the regulatory agency selecting among those members. And what you usually choose is you choose people who have a lot of experience and a lot of training and have been in this before, and that takes, and those people are usually very busy. And they assume this work because they are committed to making
Roxana,
this.
can I interrupt you for a
Yes,
second? At times,
yes.
we have hard time in listening. So can you kindly come close to the mic or
I,
so that we can have a better quality of the sound? Thank you so much.
I will do that. I will do that. Thank you for telling me. I'm going to improve my microphone as well. Okay, so it was very difficult to ensure those 8 to 12 hours weekly when members were already engaged in their regular job. Some of them in the front line of COVID-19 fights, others virtually working, but everybody busy. Oversight was another issue. We established monthly reports for every study we approved because we needed to see what was happening out in the field when the study was taking place. We needed to see if it was being conducted as they had planned or if they needed to make changes to the protocol because the emergency setting was not going to let them. And we needed to know also, we needed to know soon if new information may cause the participant to change his or her mind about continuing in the study. And as you know, the information on COVID-19 research kept being published almost on a weekly basis. So we, we asked for monthly reports for every one of our COVID trials, telling us what was happening, how many participants had been screened, how many had been enrolled, how many had declined in the informed consent process, how many had been excluded, lost to follow up, etc., etc. And that was pretty much all we could do because there was immobilization and lockdown, and we couldn't move. couldn't go to the hospitals and see what was happening. So challenges I've already mentioned. You need beyond an experienced um, member who is already trained in human subject protections and the IRB procedures. We needed highly specialized training, particularly when vaccine trials started coming our way, and that type of training was not available. We just didn't have a chance to. We connected with one or two experts, one in the United States, one in Chile, and we asked them to provide us with a series of sessions, but that was all we could do. And we found the need to understand the science a challenge. We also, as I just mentioned in oversight, we didn't have much time to do oversight. The monthly reports was all we could do. We had a huge issue reading the papers and and seeing that the community, the society at large, was very confused between research and public health concepts. The press kept talking about the vaccine. Go and get your vaccine, and they were never saying that if you participated in the vaccine trial, you may have been in the placebo arm or in the active arm. Nobody talked about placebo, and the community continued to think that they were getting a vaccine when they weren't. They were participating in a trial, and that was clearly defined in the informed consent process. And the people who provided the informed consent to the participants were very well trained, but the press and maybe issues of bad communication continue to highlight um, continue to highlight issues that were not, as if it was not research. And at this time, nine months after the start of the national transitory IRB, we have IRB member burnout. So where are we? We have reviewed 36 clinical trials. We have approved 34 of those 36. Approval time has been about 5 weeks. Peru has seen 3 phase 3 vaccine trials. All of them are enrolling at this moment. We have seen 4 convalescent plasma trials reviewed and approved. All of these 4 convalescent plasma trials were locally sponsored. They were not sponsored by pharma. 10 of the 36 trials that we reviewed were sponsored by universities without any financial support from pharma. Um, because of because of our requirements for training in the investigators that were to be conducting trials, we asked for certificates in good clinical practices, and we had certificates in human subject protection. More than 300 Peruvian researchers are currently properly trained, and so this will be a very important workforce for future research in Peru. The Global Health Network has been crucial in providing this training because they provided us with their platform for training, and it was in Spanish and it was free of charge. So with very limited resources, this was an amazing opportunity. We also learned and adapted to electronic consents or consents that were done by telephone. We started talking to the investigators and to the contract research organizations about the need for material transfer agreements, which had not been an issue before. We don't have a legal requirement for material transfer agreements in Peru. So it was a first for us. It was received at the beginning with what? What is this? This is new. We've never been asked for this before, but we are not having many problems right now. but it's still an area that needs to be supported by more organizations than just the national IRB. And we continue to have our monthly reports. So in recommendations and summary, I, 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 I cannot emphasize enough the importance of institutional support for this type of national IRBs. You cannot have a national IRB if you as an institution, whether it is the Ministry of Health or the research regulatory body, uh, they have an obligation to provide administrative support of the best kind possible. They have an obligation to provide a platform for meeting, for secure meetings, and they have an obligation to provide a platform for storing all of this important research information in a way that is secure. Without that, you will have the IRB chair running in many directions, acting as a secretary or acting as a rapporteur, and not being able to concentrate on what really is required. In Peru, we have had amazing administrative support in the name of Dr. Sara Carracedo, who is executively well prepared to conduct this type of tasks. Additionally, Additionally, we have experienced the need to be rigorous and to make sure that all the studies that we approve comply, not just with ethical principles, but with our own regulations. And in many instances, in the absence of Peruvian regulations for fast tracking, with the guidance provided by WHO and the Pan American Health Organization. We having those tools in our hands allowed us to conduct our work properly. The third recommendation is the importance of experienced and trained members, but in addition to experience and training, commitment. And if I may, I've said it before, but I want to state it again. It is groups that are committed with capacity building, like the Global Health Network, the ones that we come to when we have questions for specialized training. So I think that for the future, we need to work together on identifying what areas we need more training on. And finally, we need to have our own operating procedures, ones that respond to our needs, that are regularly available, and that help us standardize our review. Those are the references of the documents that I've provided, and that is my email if I can be of help. Thank you for allowing me to share our experience.
Thank you so much, Roxana. It was amazing to see that how effectively you have your country have responded, and with a clear mechanism that was required at the time of this public health emergency. And that was such a clear presentation. So we have very good questions coming in. We can take only a few questions for now, and because we need to keep our control of the time as well. So, and for the rest of the questions that we cannot cover now, we will try to cover them at the end of the workshop today, or maybe we will try to get back to them in the form of written responses for the questions. So one of the attendees has asked that how did the IRB dealt with the challenges of reviewing the risk-benefit ratio in a rapidly emerging, as the evidence kept on rapidly emerging, and at times it was conflicting. So we would like to have your reviews on this, Roxana.
Thank you. That is probably one of the most important questions that we as an IRB asked ourselves regularly. So you identify the risk based on the safety profile of the drug that is going to be tested. And that require reading the investigator brochure, looking at literature that was published on that same product before, because what you have seen in these clinical trials are the use of products that were used for something else, for a different condition, now being used for COVID. So a very detailed look on the safety profile of the product was usually the first step. And our physician members were crucial in identifying and describing the risk. The benefit was not dying. Peru had a very high rate of deaths in our country, and there was not much you could do. There was no standard of care. There still is no standard of care. There were some emergency use authorization products, but that was all we had. So you compare the safety profile with the potential of not dying or the potential of that participant not going into ICU because the percentage of individuals who went into ICU and died was very high because of our difficult hospital infrastructure. So I think that my answer would be that a very thorough analysis of the safety profile of the drug is what determined the risk.
Thank you, Roxana. And we can very well imagine that that was the hardest part of doing ethics review of studies at the start of this pandemic. And we still believe that the situation has not changed much. We do not know if there are any proven treatments, and that is the difficult part, to find out how to weigh the societal good in term for research, as well as the individual rights and the risks and the benefits. So there is another question from one of the attendees. How did you handle the consent process? How was the recruitment of participants done, considering the conspiracy theory flying over everywhere? And as you just mentioned, that the mortality was so high at those times. So if you could describe how effective consent was ensured. Thank you. Over to you,
Um,
Roxana.
Thank you. That's probably another very important issue of discussion in our IRB. You can never tell how effective consent is at the end of the day. All you can do is ensure that the process is as thorough as possible. So the first thing we did on the training side is ensure that all of the individuals who were going to be involved in providing consent were properly trained. The second thing we did was, even if it was going to be an electronic consent, you needed a written consent to be reviewed and approved by the IRB. The third thing we did is the identification of the um, uh, legally authorized representative. And we had many discussions about the legally authorized representative because of the fact that many of the research trials were conducted with participants who were hospitalized, and many of them uh, not capable of providing consent, maybe able to provide consent but not able to sign, for example, the consent. Many of our studies needed the participation of the legally authorized representative. What we did as an IRB is that we required that once the consent was completed by the legally authorized representative and the study started, the moment the participant woke up and recovered competence, that the investigator went back to him and reaffirmed his intention to participate in the trial. That gave us the gave us an as an IRB gave us the feeling that the participants' opinion was being heard, even though his enrollment had started with the consent of his family member. Um, in many of those cases, the participant, we don't know if in many of those cases the participant said, okay, I want to continue in the trial. But remember, most of these trials involved 1 to 7 days of drug treatment and then it was a long follow-up period. So by the time the participant woke up, the drug had already been administered, and the participant was in follow-up period. So we assume, and we are looking forward to the monthly reports, that when the participant woke up and he was reconsented, that he did not disagree with being part of the study. But we felt that that was a way for us to ensure that the autonomy of the participant was being respected even during these difficult times. With the vaccine trials, it was different because we were talking about healthy subjects, right? So the IRB spent a lot of time reviewing the web pages and the advertising material to ensure that the message was clear and not not subliminal, not too enhancing of the benefits of a vaccine that we still don't know if it's going to work. In addition, we reviewed the flow of the information to participants. So participants would access a web page, they would see some of the information, and if they were still interested, they would click and go to and to indicate that they're interested in receiving more. So we ensure that the participant was not being bombarded with information he was not interested in receiving by asking for that click, give me more information. And as the participant kept on clicking, he would receive more information and always have the option of saying, okay, no, I don't need anymore. I don't want anymore. The participant had a chance to read the informed consent over the web page or over the email, depending on the study. And then the participant clicked if he was willing to have an appointment. And then the participant came to the appointment, and he participated in an informed consent discussion in vivo, because now the participant was here for the appointment, for the screening, and potentially for the first dose, whether it was the vaccine candidate or whether it was the placebo. So there were several steps toward participating in the trial in the case of the vaccines, and the participants were very well informed. So well informed that many of them would say, but I don't want the placebo. Is there any way I can just get the vaccine candidate? So we felt that information was provided, information was understood, and in Peru, the response of the community toward participating in clinical trials has been very active, very positive. I hope I have answered your question a little about the informed consent.
Thank you so much, Roxana. That was just wonderful. We have received more questions directed towards you, but at the moment, we would like to move to our next study. What we can do, we can try to get back, take these questions in the question and answer sessions, and we will try to answer all of these. But for now, to keep a track of the time, we would like to move to our next case study, and I would like to thank Roxana once again. So we will now continue with Dr. Roli Mathur. She's scientist and head of ICMR Bioethics Unit at the National Center for Disease Informatics and Research, Indian Council for Medical Research. Dr. Roli will comment on the guidelines and experiences of Indian National Ethics Committee reviews. So, Dr. Roli, um, over to you. I would request you to kindly unmute yourself. Whenever you share your slides, please turn on the slideshow mode. That would be great. And thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Roli.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farah, and I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present the case study from India, how we have handled the difficult time to do related to ethics review at the level of ICMR. So I'm really happy to share some of our experiences. And just a small brief about my institute. I work at the Indian Council of Medical Research, which is the apex organization under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare for promotion, formulation, and coordination of biomedical and health research in India. And it houses the Central Ethics Committee on Human Research, which serves as a National Ethics Committee. On the right, you see the network of ICMR institutions spread throughout the country. So it's a huge network of a variety of institutions which are dealing with a variety of topics for research in various areas. So this is our network. And ICMR has been very, very active right from 1980 onwards in building the ethical guidance for the country. And the first policy document came out in the year 1980. And from then on, you can see the number of documents that were prepared, with the latest one being the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research Involving Human Participants in 2017. And of course, we came up with a new guideline this year that I'll just share with you. So also we are involved in a lot of capacity building. We are doing a number of training courses because we do not have as many regular training courses running in the country. There's a need for many workshops. So we have done a number of such courses across the country. And this is our main guideline document, which has 12 different sections, which are dealing with various aspects of biomedical and health research, right from principles, issues, conduct of research. There is a separate chapter on ethical review procedures, important for the ethics committee work. And then of course on informed consent, dealing with people who are vulnerable, clinical trials, public health, socio-behavioral sciences, genetics, biobanking. And there was a 12th chapter on humanitarian emergencies and disasters. However, at the time when this guideline was made in 2017, we had no idea that there would be something like COVID that may come up. However, this guideline did suggest a framework and preemptive preparation for dealing with emergencies and outbreaks. It talked about having expedited review procedures, holding unscheduled meetings, having teleconferences, talking about electronic informed consent, waiver of consent, and also talked about equitable distribution of risks and benefit and fair selection of participants at the time of emergency to reduce stigmatization or ostracization and maintain dignity, privacy, confidentiality of the people, and to engage them in a culturally sensitive manner. So these were some of the highlights in this chapter. However, in addition, there is a setup in the country, which is that now it is a requirement that every ethics committee has to be registered with the National Registry of India. So there is a national registry that was set up in 2019, and ICMR National Ethical Guidelines have now become part of the regulations under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act rules. And they need to be followed by every researcher and every ethics committee that is undertaking biomedical health research, and registration is also mandatory. The ethics committee registration with this body is mandatory. So when the COVID struck us, we realized that besides all these requirements in place, it is also important to build upon public trust, communication, to look at ways of protecting participants, engaging with them, ensuring quality ethics review, building collaboration and partnership, and having a governance structure in place. So these are some of the other key points. So the Central Ethics Committee on Human Research that I mentioned to you about, the main mandate of this committee is to undertake high priority quality ethics review of biomedical research led by ICMR and its network of institutions. It addresses emerging ethical challenges and recommends national guidelines and policy. So the various documents that you have seen have been prepared under the aegis of the Central Ethics Committee. And this committee is appointed by the Director General ICMR, and it serves at the national level committee for ICMR. Now, besides I would like to share with you some of the structure of how the framework is. So Central Ethics Committee works at the central level as the highest body, but then there are ethics committees that are located in each and every institute at the hospital level or research institutional level, which are responsible for the local review and locally monitoring various aspects of the research that is implemented. So even when a research is reviewed at the central level, it also undergoes a local review at the institutional level, because India being such a large country with a variety of socio-cultural norms, languages, customs, which are followed across the country, it is very important that we take into consideration the local aspects of the study. Now, there are two registration mechanisms that are available. One is the one that I mentioned, which is for all research ethics committees. They have to register with the DHR, but then there is another registration, which is with the Central Drug Standards Control Organization, which is like a FDA equivalent in India. So any ethics committee that is reviewing clinical trials has to also register with CDSCO. So there are two registrations. So every ethics committee is required to register with DHR plus additional registration with CDSCO if it is also reviewing clinical trials. Then there is a system of accreditation that is also available at the national level, and ethics committee, it is currently voluntary that the ethics committees who are engaged in reviewing clinical trials are also required to go through this accreditation, even though it's voluntary, but most of the good ethics committees are going through the process now. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Central Ethics Committee reviewed a variety of types of research. It was clinical trial, case control studies, serosurveillance studies, observational studies, implementation research, socio-behavioral surveys, validation of molecular diagnostic tests, etc., etc. So many types of research, and we've had 19 meetings plus expedited reviews, reviewing 23 research proposals. These were large multi-centric studies that were reviewed at the central level. And we had to really work very hard. And as Roxana mentioned, to make a turnaround time of 48 to 72 hours per meeting, we had to really work overtime. But what we felt was that this action is needed because we needed rapid action. We have to be responsive, but we have to ensure the quality and we have to be robust in our decision making. So the constitution of CECHR, which was actually a very large committee initially, was reconstituted in the month of May. And a new committee was appointed, which had main members, and then there were a set of alternate members of different disciplines. So we had, for example, if we had two clinicians, there were two alternate clinician members. Similarly, if there were 3 lawyers, there were 4 basic scientists, there was 4 social scientists. So there were more members appointed so that we would always have availability of members, even if we have to fix a meeting in a short notice. And that would also not lead to burnout of members because we had an alternate panel that was available. Also, we engaged with a lot of independent experts, subject experts, who had no voting rights, but they were invited based on the proposals that were received, or based on the topic. These subject experts were identified and invited. We made sure that there was good science. Unless there is good science, unless there were scientific approvals by the committees, the proposal found it difficult to go through the ethics committees because the ethics committees were raising a lot of scientific questions. So we insisted that the researchers make sure the scientific aspects are taken care of and there are scientific approvals additional in place to carry out our quality ethics review. Also, we looked at the sites which were involved, the investigator qualifications and experience, how they are going to talk about engagement with the people who are going to be recruited. Then also we thought about, our members were digitally literate, who were able to use virtual platforms. So this was while we reconstituted a new committee, this was taken into consideration, and they were told that this is the turnaround time. And I'm very thankful to the whole committee that really acted very responsibly and helped, and still we are continuing with this. Then we also stress upon the importance of the local ethics review and monitoring. So for a large multicentric study, for example, when a central review was given, approval was given, after that, the local ethics committee would do an expedited review to look at it from the local perspective and to be responsible for local site monitoring to see how informed consent is being done and so on. So although ethics committees were encouraged to review rapidly, there were no shortcuts taken or no compromises in the quality of review processes. We found that there were a lot of benefits of virtual meeting. We found that it was very easy, to fix a meeting in a very short timeline, because member availability could be checked and nobody had to travel anywhere. People were in their offices or homes, and they could join the meetings. There were shortened timelines. We could invite experts from across the country. We did not have to, since we are based in Bangalore, we were not dependent on Bangalore-based experts, but we could invite experts from anywhere across the country. Easily, we could record the meetings, we could record minutes. It was easy to do that. And we did not face really problems with connectivity in India. Most of the places, we have very good internet connectivity, and we were able to actually talk face to face, and we did not find it a big problem. And we have several meeting platforms which were used and tried. Conflicts of interest were declared, and it was again easy to manage in an online meeting, where the members who had conflict of interest could just leave the meeting and join afterwards. So it was all very smoothly done, and it was as good as a face-to-face interaction. And we saved on a lot of money in terms of budget, because we did not have to pay travel allowances or airfares. So it is friendly. And then I think this is going to be the new normal, even when we return back to normalcy, because the lessons that we have learned from these virtual meetings is amazing, I think. And we need to save the our planet Earth, and reduce the carbon footprint. So I think this is really a useful way that we all must work towards it. Of course, there are hiccups, but we need to work towards them and make it more efficient. The second activity that I wanted to share with you was about the national guidelines that we had developed during the COVID-19. This was again a very fast action that we had taken, because when we realized that we did have a chapter number 12 in our main guideline document, but there were certain things that needed more details. And therefore this CECHR had guided this activity of preparation of the guidelines. It dealt with not only COVID-related research, but also non-COVID-related new research, or ongoing, or how to handle ongoing research. It talked about having virtual meetings, because before this, the quorum of ethics committee had to be in person. So this was the change, where an electronic quorum was found to be acceptable. Then also it explained about in what cases the study could be exempt from review, or when it could be expedited for review, or a research should be taken for full committee review. There was emphasis on participatory practices, employing innovative methods and tools, and dealing with stigma, psychosocial well-being, violence, and preventing the spread of infodemic. So we were one of the earliest guidelines that came out in April 2020. It says these are available on our website. The guidelines explain the roles of ethics committee to ensure science as well as ethics, to facilitate quick review processes. And also it gives out this, that if a local ethics committee is not available, any other local ethics committee could also review, which is in the vicinity, in order to ensure timely review. And ethics committees, of course, needed to be registered with the bodies, and unscheduled meetings were suggested. And the Clinical Trial Registry of India. So this was another new thing, because as per our rules and regulations, currently, only clinical trials that are regulatory for marketing approval of new products are required to register on the CTRI, the Clinical Trial Registry platform. However, for COVID-19, it was suggested that every COVID-19 research should be registered on this platform. And also the guidelines suggested the importance of monitoring. So we were able to think about shortened timeline, having video face-to-face, shorter agendas were suggested, because in an online meeting, we cannot go on the whole day. So we have to have shorter agendas. So what we did was, even if there was one proposal that came, the meeting was fixed for that. So we could have a 1 or 2 hour meeting and do for an efficient review. The frequency of the meeting could be more than normal. So for example, if a meeting happens only once in a month or once in 2 months, now it could be held weekly. Subject experts or independent consultants should be used more and more. And of course, it talked about discussing preventing stigma and balancing between the privacy and mandatory disclosures with the public health authorities, and suggested the need for oral and electronic methods for consenting. So this was a new thing. It suggested that avoid direct interaction, use more and more technology, and a waiver of consent was also suggested where de-identified or anonymized data or samples were going to be used, or things which were in public domain. But of course, we did understand that there were practical challenges, and these ethics committees have to look at them more carefully. And also there is inability to differentiate between relief, care, and research in these times, and this was stressed upon. The guidelines have discussed about the importance of engaging with communities, safety of healthcare workers, dealing with people who are vulnerable, avoiding the discrimination, and ensuring psychosocial well-being. Then besides the main guideline document, we also developed a SOP template for ethics committees, because most of the ethics committees said we do not have an SOP available to carry out an emergency review. How do we go about it? So very quickly, the SOPs were drafted, posted on our website, from where many ethics committees were able to download and adopt these SOPs so as to initiate their own virtual meetings. And I'm glad to say that a lot of committees have adopted, and they were doing efficient reviews following the electronic methods. Another suggestion that was about using common forms and checklists. So ICMR had earlier prepared a common application form for initial review, and this was found to be very useful, especially when they were multi-centric research, because it had a checklist through which, if the submission is complete, actually there are delays at the ethics committee level if the submission is not complete. So this helped to ensure that the submission is complete, and therefore improving the quality of review. And the other suggestion that was there in the guidelines is about having common review of multi-center research, so that there is one designated ethics committee that conducts a full review, and the local ethics committee can expedite and focus on site-specific issues, and review by other ECs, as I explained earlier. So these two things also further help in improving our capacity to do ethics review on a fast-track basis. So these are the suggestions finally that we need to adopt 2 innovative platforms to have a rapid response to emergency while ensuring ethical standards and quality, and register all such research on the CTRI platform. We also did looked at the downloads. We found that our guidelines were downloaded by more than 30 countries from across the world, and of course from various parts of the country as well. And the guidelines of ICMR have, these are one of the only guidelines which have been recognized by in the UHRT website when you file an application for a FWA. So we feel proud to share that with you. With that, I'd like to end, and thank you all very much for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rohini Mathur. So it was enlightening. You have not just enlisted the challenges, but we have learned so much very effective solutions, that how you have effectively addressed the needs of for ethics review committees to deal with the challenges which were posed. So this was just amazing. So there are few questions in the question and answer box. Let's see if we can take all of these right now, or maybe we can come to you after in the question and answer session. So if you could elaborate one thing for us. You have just mentioned that you used common review by one of the designated ethics committee, and the local ethics committees in different institutions, they would just review the local issues of the institution. So may I ask that how, what was the criteria for selection of designated IRB that would complete a common review for a sort of a designated review? So what was the criteria for that IRB? How did you assess and this determination was made? If you could elaborate on that. Thank you, Dr. Rohini.
Thank you, Dr. Farah. That is the million-dollar question, actually, because in the when we had done a piloting for the common review, this was the biggest challenge as to know which ethics committee should be the lead or should be the designated EC, and there it is not easy to handle. So generally, if in a multicentric study, if there is a coordinating site, the main site which is coordinating that study where, so for us, for example, in our case, it was at the ICMR headquarters level where the ICMR coordinating unit was coordinating a large number of these studies. So let me, for example, give the example of the PLACID trial, the plasma trial that was conducted in more than, I think, 60 institutions. So in that, for example, the Central Ethics Committee had done a common review. But then as per our regulatory requirement, the local site where the trial is to be conducted, which has to be also registered with the CTSEO, has also to do the local review at that level. So we played the role of the central committee, but then these sites had to do their local review at their own level. For many of these studies that we did, we were the central committee. But for some of the other non-ICMR research, we do also have examples from other institutions who have followed the guideline, and main coordinating center has actually acted as the designated. It has to be a mutual decision. It need not be, I am more powerful than you. It is a mutual decision if there are multi-sites involved, and that should be based on the, the ethics committee, how often it meets, and based on those discussions. One of the other challenges that ethics committees actually don't talk to each other. So that is one of the things, if we can take care of it, where ethics committees talk to each other, then things will really greatly improve. So we need to invest in ethics committees. Ethics committees have been a part-time activity for most of the institutions, and it's time that we invest in ethics committees in building them up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I would completely agree that ethics committee may need to talk to each other and interact, and they can learn from each other's experience. And this is the time we need a more synchronized approach to deal with the challenges posed by the COVID-19 and the search and research. Thank you so much, Dr. Roli Mathur. We believe that we will come back to you with a few more questions. We have interesting questions in the question and answer box, but this is the time for us to move to our next presentation. So last but not the least, we continue with Dr. Dario Scaramuzzi, who is the Partnership and Capacity Development Manager at our Evolution Worldwide, and who has more than 20 years of experience with clinical research and is currently working on ethics biomedical research across Africa. Dr. Dario will be speaking about regulatory authorities and research ethics boards in sub-Saharan Africa. So I would invite Dr. Dario, and Dr. Dario, over to you. I would request you to unmute yourself and kindly turn on the slideshow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Farah, and thank you very much to the Global Health Network for this opportunity to talk a little bit about regulatory authorities and the research ethics board in sub-Saharan Africa. I have prepared some slides just to facilitate our discussions. So we will talk about the overall context and the challenges in sub-Saharan Africa. We will have a brief overview of the activities and ongoing and next programs, and then we will end with the conclusion. So what does it mean, preparedness? The dictionary says that it is the state of being prepared for a particular situation. But in particular, what does it mean, preparedness, in so beautiful continent? Africa is not only a wonderful continent, but it is also a very big continent. We have 54 countries, 2 times the countries in the European Union, with a population of 1.3 billion, 3 times the one in the European Union, and a very big range of per capita gross domestic product, from the very low 100 US dollars to the 70,000 US dollars, similar to some European countries. We have up to 2,000 of languages. So Africa is a wonderful, big, and varying countries. So in this context, what is important to consider in terms of preparedness is harmonization. Many efforts have been done to achieve harmonization in ethics and regulatory environment. Between them, for sure, has to be mentioned AVRF. AVRF is the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum, a Pan-African network of national regulatory authorities and ethics committee. It was established by WHO. Indeed, it is hosted in WHO Afro in Brazzaville, Republic of Congo, Central Africa, to promote harmonization of ethics and regulatory processes in the continent. The initial scope of AVRF was extended also to medical and medical devices, and very importantly, under its umbrella, the African countries are currently domesticating common tools for research protocol review, approval, and oversight. For COVID-19 pandemic, the national regulatory authorities and the National Ethics Committee across Africa have also agreed to combine their expertise to share knowledge under the AVRF platform in order to expedite clinical trials review and approvals for new multinational preventive diagnostic and therapeutic intervention for this pandemic. Indeed, COVID-19 pandemic, as we have discussed, has dramatically reduced the opportunities for face-to-face meetings. Therefore, the member states of AVRF adopted the below measures to address this challenge and establish a COVID-19 expedited clinical trial review. Has been established an online platform, SharePoint, where joint reviews of clinical trial application for preventive diagnostic and therapeutic intervention related COVID-19 pandemic are occurring. Participating countries, national regulatory authorities, national ethics committee, and targeted ethics review boards are posting their queries online for real-time response from sponsor and applicants. The Secretariat of AVRF will convene and coordinate virtual meetings for participating countries to conduct joint reviews of clinical trial application on COVID-19. Virtual meetings are also be used to discuss pertinent issues on how regulators and ethics committee can better prepare and respond to COVID-19 pandemic. And the regulatory authorities and ethics committees can use a separate platform mainnet to share information on planned or ongoing clinical trials in their countries. However, what we have to remind is that there was a before this pandemic, and not all we are experiencing came with COVID-19, but could have roots in the past. Indeed, in 1999, it was identified the gap called the 1019, highlighting how only the 10% of world research expenditures were spent on disease causing 19% of the mortality, occurring mainly in middle and low-income countries. Despite multi-sectoral initiatives achieved since then, several changes are still faced to reduce this gap, especially in Africa. Indeed, Africa only hosts about 10,000 clinical studies, the 3% of the global figure, despite being home of the 18% of the world's population. Moreover, within Africa, clinical research is distributed unevenly, with most trials hosted in just few countries. This jeopardizes the distribution of clinical trials, inevitably leads to neglected public health needs, untapped resource, unsustained initiative, unethical waste of resources in a context of limitations. So the second key value to consider in terms of preparedness is sustainability. A lot of efforts have been made already in Africa in order to increase the sustainability, and among them has to be reminded some networks. So to increase the sustainability of the response to emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases, important steps forward have been made already, as with the ALERT and the Pandora networks, for example. ALERT is the African Coalition for Epidemic Research, Response and Training, and Pandora is the Pan-African Network for Rapid Research, Response and Preparedness for Infectious Disease Epidemics. Already in 2018, these networks, together with the WHO, jointly review guidelines in order to increase the preparedness for public health emergencies. Indeed, already in 2018, it was issued the Ethics Preparedness Facilitating Ethics Review during Outbreaks recommendation. However, ethics and the regulatory institutions are still facing some issues, including insufficient and varying ethical guidelines, lack or outdated SOPs, unharmonious ethics and regulatory procedures, leading often to a sequential rather than in parallel ethics and regulatory review and approvals, lack of specific trainings and procedures for reviewing during public health emergencies, unclear instruction to follow by sponsor applicants for their submission, and insufficient legislative reassurance for the safety of study participant, scientific integrity, and data protection. The African ethics and regulatory capacity are often also compromised by the lack of trained personnel, human resources capacity, and financial resources. Consequently, delays in clinical trial application approval and lack of oversight in conduction of trials are common. Remarkably, some countries do not have formal national ethics committee or standard operating procedure for evaluating clinical trial proposal yet. In a context of weak logistics and infrastructures, also the lack of electronic platforms for ethics and regulatory submission and review is an issue impairing the review and approval capacity. However, the rapid increase and complexity of interdisciplinary, multi-partner, cross-border, multi-country health research currently taking place requires the urgency for research ethics committees and regulatory institution capacity for timeliness and responsiveness. Looking at the past outbreak, we observed a significant rapid increase of clinical research application to be quickly reviewed by the relevant ethics and regulatory institution, like during the Western African Ebola outbreak 2014-2016. And then, after the end of the Ebola outbreak, a significant decrease of this research application, returning this ethics committee and the regulatory institution again in a low activity state. From the first, we have also to mention that from the first known outbreak, 1976, in Africa, there were more than 28 Ebola major outbreaks. an average of a new outbreak every 1.5 years just for Ebola, without mentioning those for Lassa, measles, cholera, yellow fever, meningitis, malaria, HIV, TB, and neglected tropical disease, highlighting the importance of having a system capable of managing the emerging and re-emerging of infectious disease. Further, during the Ebola outbreaks, including the one in DRC just ended, monitoring emergency use of unregistered and investigational intervention, emergency use assessment for listening procedures, and compassionate use expanded access procedures were adopted, placing the African institution at the forefront of management of these high-level ethical and regulatory topics. Within this context, the ethics and the regulatory system in Africa continuously change their activity status from low to very high demanding situations. So the third key value to keep in mind in order to achieve preparedness during public health emergency in Africa is resilience. Around the three key values aforementioned, harmonization, sustainability, and resilience, programs aimed at strengthening the capacity of ethics and the regulatory system to adapt their operativeness before, during, and following public health emergencies, so it can continue to necessary operation under both foreseen and unforeseen conditions, have been developed in collaboration with national ethics committees, IBs, and national regulatory authorities in 15 sub-Saharan African countries. Within these programs, we are testing a new groundbreaking collaborative model. Indeed, a cross-cutting approach by linking the ethics and the regulatory institution together with the research network and regional stakeholders, thus to create hubs and channel of exchanges and regular sharing have been developed. These synergies will establish an environment favorable to the increasing of ethically and scientifically biomedical research. Indeed, within these programs, coordinators from the networks of excellence in research like CANTAM, the Central African Clinical Research Network, of TESA, Trials of Excellence in South Africa, but also the Eastern African Consortium for Clinical Research and the East African Communities and Southern African Development Communities are coordinators and members of these programs strengthening ethics and regulatory. Between these programs, as to be mentioned, Library Etica, aimed at increasing the ethics capacity of oversight for clinical trials in Liberia. Africa Clinic, and a European African Network for strengthening the regulatory capacity for clinical research and pharmacovigilance in Central Africa, involving Republic of Congo, Cameroon, and Gabon. AFRIETIC, an European African Network for strengthening the ethics capacity for clinical research review in Democratic Republic of Congo, Republic of Central Africa, Chad, and the Republic of Congo. CECHR, aimed at increasing the regulatory capacity for review of clinical trials in Mozambique, Botswana, Lesotho, and Eswatini. And among the next programs, we have STRENGTH, aimed at strengthening ethics and regulatory capacity in Burkina Faso. MUST, aimed at strengthening regulatory and ethics in Malawi. And SUPER, strengthening regulatory and ethical capacity in Uganda and Tanzania. Finally, despite the COVID-19, however, COVID-19 pandemic differs from past outbreaks. For example, the aforementioned Ebola, as it involves also Africa and not just Africa. Therefore, COVID-19 pandemic, despite its graveness, represent for the African ethics and the regulatory bodies the first ever potential opportunity to exchange globally on common ethics and regulatory challenges. So to make a substantial step forward, not only in this pandemic, but also to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, a common sustainable development goals. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much also for allowing me to share these experiences.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dario. And there was so much that we could learn from this. It is amazing to see the variety of the initiatives, and I would like to thank you for sharing the key values, because that is the direction that all of us would need. You have mentioned the synergies of the regulatory bodies, ethics, as well as the research stakeholders. So I would like to know if you could elaborate the research stakeholders, who are they and how you have taken them in this synergy. And secondly, where is the community in this in this cycle? So if you could elaborate that, that would be that I would appreciate. Thank you, Dr. Dari.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Indeed, it is one of the main value of our programs. I like to refer to them as programs rather than to projects, because the project have a start and end, and these are mainly programs. So of course they are focused on the improvements of ethics and regulatory. So for example, the first stages of these programs are always based on assessment of weaknesses and strengths of ethics and regulatory institutions. But after these initial stages, the programs develop synergies with other communities, like the research communities, in order to develop together the actions to be implemented in order to strengthen ethics and regulatory procedures. So, for example, in some of the mentioned programs like AFI-Ethic and AFI-Clinic and AFI-Ethic, we have as coordinator the coordinator of CANTAM, the Central African Clinical Research Network, that is one of the 4 regional networks of excellence in the research funded by the European Union. And of course, as you can imagine, by putting together the excellence of ethics, regulatory, and research, is allowing us to create hubs and hubs of sharing knowledge and expertise. Very helpful, especially during the public health emergencies. Another example is the program that I described before, CECHR, in which we have as a coordinator Dr. Eusebio Massete, which is also the coordinator of TESA, the Trials of Excellence in Southern Africa. That is again another network of excellence in research in Southern Africa. But let me also mention that within these programs, we have also involved also the, for example, the Southern African Development Community, in order to work with them and with their policy and decision makers in order to implement the outcome of the reviewing of ethical and regulatory guidelines, so to have them implemented at not only at a national but also at a regional level.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Dario. So we have one more question from my colleague, Dr. Mariam Hassan. Having an experience of this pandemic as well as previous emergencies that we have witnessed and Africa has witnessed firsthand. So what is your opinion? The accelerated review for research, is it helpful? Is this the way forward, or it has adversely affected the research? What is your take on this? Thank you.
It is a key value. It is absolutely a key value. Let me make an example of what happened in during the Western African Ebola outbreak during 2014 and 2016. Many clinical trials, further the ones completed, were submitted during that outbreak. However, many trials, not only regarding vaccine, but also treatments for Ebola, unfortunately were approved while the outbreak was already ending. So timeliness is critical. Also regarding ethics and regulatory responsiveness. And of course, it is also important how to achieve this responsiveness. So yes, it is important, but it is also important to keep to the highest level the protection of the populations involved in the research.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. We have more questions, but we have a dedicated section for question and answer, and we will try to take as many questions in our dedicated session, that is right after the break. So we will now take a short break in the program for 10 minutes. We recommend you take this time away from your computer and maybe stretch yourself or seek some refreshment or coffee. But if you would prefer chat, we have enabled the chat function so that you can have a one-to-one chat if you would like to do so. We will share a timer on the screen, so please return promptly so we can begin the next session in the program. So see you after a short break. Bye-bye. So welcome back, everyone. Please turn off your video and microphone so that we can maintain quality and enable everyone to focus on the session. We will now open our question and answer session with the panel. And for that, I would like to introduce you to three of our more panelists who have kindly joined us for this session. We are delighted to be joined by Dr. CECHR, who is Senior Lecturer at the Department of Philosophy and Classics at the University of Ghana and a visiting fellow at the University of Oxford. Further, we have been joined by Catherine Littrell, who co-leads the Global Health Ethics and Governance Unit at the Research for Health Department at the World Health Organization. And we have been joined by Francis P. Crowley, who is Coordinator, European Fellowship in Research Ethics, Executive Director, Good Clinical Practice Alliance, Europe, and Strategic Initiative for Developing Capacity in Ethical Review. So I'm excited that we have a panel, and we already have received questions from our attendees. So I'm looking forward to this panel discussion so that we can learn from the experience of our panel. And at the same time, there are a few questions for which we would go to our presenters from our first part of the workshop. So can I ask my first question to Dr. CECHR? So as we have seen that most of the research ethics committees, they have in preparation and in response to the COVID-19 emergency, most of them they have adopted. They have done a lot of adaptations. We have seen 5 case studies, 2 from India and rest of the case studies from other parts of the world. And we have seen that ethics committees in different parts of the world, they have prepared themselves. They have done a lot of adaptations to deal and to address the challenges which are posed by COVID-19 research and the surge in the research that we have seen directed towards this novel disease. So my first question for Dr. CECHR would be that how should we assess that the ethics committees are sufficiently qualified and prepared to review the research related to emerging public health emergencies? Here, who would assess? Is there anyone who would assess this? Who is the locus of accountability here? Is a self-assessment by ethics committees or their institution sufficient here? Or because the threat would be that yes, the studies are being routed through ethics committees, but if we are not sure about the competencies of ethics committee, we are not sure if the ethics review was done effectively. So I would like to have your take on this. Dr. CECHR, please.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me. The discussions have been very interesting so far, and some of the panelists we meet on various boards, so I'm sure they also have a lot to add to this. But yeah, the question you're asking is very important. I mean, is the classic question of quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who actually is the guardian of the guardian, right? Now, I think ethics committees have not, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, are not all prepared to meet this emergency situation. In the previous presentation, Dr. Scaramuzzi tried to show some of the networks that exist and the capacity building that is going on. But this emergency has suddenly, pushed the demand on ethics committees to be able to step up their activities. Now, the question is, how do we assess the competence of ethics committees? Well, I think there is one consideration that I would like to make before I then look at the question of assessing their capacities. Let's not forget about the fact that actually engaging local ethics committees is also a form of community engagement. So sometimes they may not even be able to give a lot of input, but that is a value. The more we engage these communities, the more we are actually carrying out community engagement, especially when we're talking about international projects. Secondly, I think what we need to do is, when we begin to look at ethics reviews, we may need to put ethics reviews a little bit under the microscope. Whereas members of a local ethics committee may not be able to offer new insights into the scientific quality or the scientific input of a research project, they can actually offer a lot of guidance with regard to the local context. And therefore, in trying to assess the work that they're doing, we need to assess it from, with these two criteria in mind. On the one hand, scientifically, it may just seem like we're repeating the same protocols by having various various ethics committees actually analyze them. But on the other hand, we need to look at the input that they can give about adaptations to the local context. And as for assessing, I don't think there is a uniform criteria that one can actually apply across board to say that this is the uniform criteria that we should use to assess all ethics committees. The important thing is to see the real ethics that is coming out of what they're doing. Are they just rubber stamping projects or increasing bureaucracies, or they are actually protecting participants and participants within the context and ensuring that real ethical finalities are achieved. And this is what we should be looking at, I think.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dal. And yes, we would agree that there cannot be a single uniform criteria that can be applied to the IRPs, but yes, thank you so much. I would like to take my next question with Catherine Littrell. And the question is that it has been a few months that we are living in this emergency. And during this time, we witnessed a surge in research, and then there was ethics committees came, they responded well. But we have seen that across the globe, there are countries, there are frameworks, there are ethics committees which has responded well. Whereas there are certain countries which are lagging behind in their preparedness and ethics review. And of course, this would depend on their basic competences and basic framework in which they are already working. And we have seen that there is, the guidance has emerged. We have learned from previous emergencies, and during this emergency, there is a guidance for the ethics committees has emerged to steer us in the right direction for this ethics review process. But looking at the different levels of preparedness across different countries, so can you suggest a solution, or can you suggest a way forward that the countries who are lagging behind, they can pick up a good pace? What would be the advice for them, or what are the initiatives that we can take so that we can narrow down this gap? There are committees, there are countries, there are frameworks who are well prepared by now, but we do have countries who are struggling yet. So would you like to advise on this matter? Thank you.
So it's a tricky and a great and interesting question. I think I would answer it in picking up on what I heard some of the past speakers talking about. And I think part of the solution with this is we do need to identify where the gaps in research ethics capacity are. So I think that's first and foremost. And I think some of our speakers have spoken about that. I think some of these great regional initiatives like the one in Avaref, and I think you've got other regional networks like FERCAP, I think they can help with building regional capacity. I think they're important. So joining together, learning from experiences of other local and regional ethics committees is important. I think in the chat function, I think somebody's put in training. I think we need to be more effective in our online training modules to be able to provide that additional expertise. And there are some good ones out there, but I think there's some of the needs. I think I would also pick up in answering this on the question that you asked CECHR in terms of how do you identify a fully functioning ethics committee? And I don't think there is a panacea, and I don't think there is a answer for all the committees. I mean, I think some committees may be operating below their best capacity, and maybe they're not even aware of it. I think the way that they're constituted. But I think it's worth knowing that We know that most countries have established some sort of system for ethical oversight of research. We know that there have been standards for the functioning of research ethics have existed since, I think it's 2011. WHO has a document. Yet little is known to date, I think, about how these systems are working. We know that there have been some reviews done on them, obviously at the regional level. So I think we need to understand more about how these systems are working. I do think it's important to look to develop indicators. And I'll follow on from Cesar's point. I don't think it answers everything about an ethics committee, but I think it is important to measure the quality of a research ethics system. And part of doing that is the development of indicators. And I think that will help with some of these issues about promoting compliance with standards and accountability. I think it will help with this identification of gaps and areas in need of improvement. It will help with benchmarking. It will promote multi-country research by hopefully facilitating deference to other countries' ethics committees. And I know there's a lot of initiatives at the moment looking at this ethics equivalency, which I think is really important, so we avoid some of these duplicative measures of ethics review, but taking on board the points made about context being important. I think it's very important for us to understand countries' needs more broadly than research ethics committees in being able to respond to outbreaks and how fast they can respond in terms of doing the research. So WHO has been looking at the development of indicators and is currently working on that. And I think this is really part of the preparedness work that we have to focus on in between epidemics and outbreaks better. And also one of the critical things, and one of the things I really like about that AVREF initiative that was mentioned, is it is an initiative that's between the ethics oversight, but also looking at the regulatory oversight. So I think more of these conversations are important. But I think the simple answer, and I don't think there is a simple answer, is I think some of these really bottom-up regional initiatives to build core competencies in regions and identify some of the issues are key going forward. We have to be better prepared. I think everyone acknowledges that. I mean, at the beginning, our ethics, our WHO COVID R&D ethics working group has produced standard operating procedures for outbreaks and specifically looking at COVID, but how they're being implemented in different settings, we're not sure of the answer to that. So I think having indicators would help us map that. And research ethics capacity training and better understanding of needs is critical going forward. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. We would agree that there are inherent factors for the countries, and to look at that, and having indicators and having setting some sort of benchmark would help us to assess this, and it would prepare us better. So I would like to go to Francis P. Crawley for my next question. So in the current pandemic, we have seen that there is a surge of research, and we believe that this surge of research, the research is an obligatory part of emergency response, that we all agree. But during this, we have seen that there were many small studies and there were patchy studies. At times, the studies were developed in few days, and these were based on convenient partnerships at times. So so how do you see that when these studies are submitted for review? At the first step, these are ethics committees are the bodies which are charged with the duty to review these studies. But does it comes under the mandate of IRBs? Do they need to? So what is the role of IRB in this case? When we see a research surge, and we can also see that there are small studies and which might be adding to the burden on the resources which are already precious at the time of pandemics. Does that come under the purview of, under the mandate of IRB? If IRBs would see a lot of duplication, a lot of maybe bad signs. So this was one challenge that we faced firsthand, that, and this added to the burden as well. So would you like to elaborate on this? I would like to hear from you, Frances. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Farrar. It's wonderful to be part of this really excellent workshop here. And I think this workshop is in many ways showing us a way forward. If we see what Peru has done, if we see what India has done, these are examples that can lead around the world, and we can all learn from that. And I think that's really valuable, what they have to say. With regard to, you know, preparedness was you asked about preparedness before. And we can say, to a large extent, perhaps, the IRBs, the ethics committees, were not prepared. But none of us were prepared. We simply, the scientists weren't prepared, the research centers weren't prepared. We have seen that our hospitals weren't prepared. So this is really what we need to learn as we go forward, is how to be prepared. And that preparedness also includes the competence. One of the things too that's really important, and I think probably Chile and Malaysia, Turkey, places like this are good examples where we also need to learn that it's not just about the disease of the pandemic. It's not just about COVID. It's about keeping our institutions working and running. Last week on Sunday, Dr. Farrar, you and Dr. Mariam at your Shakut Khan Memorial Cancer Hospital, you organized an excellent meeting on cancer. And we've seen how many diseases are being neglected. We've seen in Africa a shortage for HIV treatment and so forth. So this preparedness for the ethics committees, for the IRBs that we're talking about today, has to be preparedness not just for addressing the, let's say, the therapeutics, the new diagnostics, the vaccines, the repurposing, or whatever it is that comes from science in order to address the disease of the pandemic, in this case, COVID-19. But also we have to see that the IRBs can continue to work and to continue to, for example, in your hospital, ensure that patients can enroll in protocols that sometimes is absolutely necessary for cancer patients or pediatric cancer patients. So what I do think what we have to learn is preparedness here, and how to prepare ourselves so that we can continue to function well during an epidemic or a pandemic. I hope I've addressed your question, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Frances. So may I ask, I request Dr. Rowley to answer my next question. One of the attendees, Grace Edison, he has asked that could you please clarify the rationale for a double review, that is first having the protocol reviewed by central or national body and then by the local IRB, taking into the consideration the need to ensure timely reviews. Were there instances of conflicting reviews by both committees? And then how you would manage if there are conflicting reviews by the two level of reviews? So can we have you, Dr. Rowley?
Yes, thank you. I think that's a very important question. Now, the thing is, when we do a ethics review, we do want to, for the sake of multi-center research, on one hand, we want to avoid duplication. We don't want to redo the same review repeatedly by all. And often we have seen that, for example, a very simple study like a survey, which may be a low risk or which may be using anonymized databases or which may not be really an intervention study, has to go through every ethics committee that is participating in a research. So the ICMR guidelines had made a suggestion that in case where the research is a low risk research, one could think of doing a common review. Now, common review, there are various suggestions about common review, which is that one designated ethics committee is identified to do the review, but then comments from the local sites need to go into it, because we would not like to take over the autonomy of a local site, because there may be site-specific concerns which the Central Ethics Committee or the Common Review Committee may not be aware of. So this is a little difficult scenario where on one hand, you want to reduce the duplication. On the other hand, you don't want to take over the autonomy of the sites. You want to give them the autonomy to make their decision making, because they have to be responsible for the local oversight. If a common review is done without involving the local ethics committee, if they have no role absolutely, then they would have no stake in doing an oversight, which is also because ethics committee review is not a one-time activity of just review and approval. It has to continue throughout. The monitoring has to be done. Even after completion of the study, the report has to be seen. If there are any participants' complaints in between, they have to be seen. Interim decisions have to be taken. So we have to sort of work around a way where we need to involve the local, but also to reduce the duplication of activity. As Dr. CECHR had rightly mentioned in his comments, the scientific review that is done, that can be taken care of at the central level, where the main major scientific issues that have ethical concerns have to be taken care at the common review level. But then if there are specific areas, because like I said before also, that India is a very large country. So one, ethics committee sitting in Delhi should not be deciding for what is being done in Bihar or Tamil Nadu. So it is very important to involve the local, have the local inputs also. So a suggestion is there that there could be a joint review, that some representative members from each of the local committee also participate in the common review process and to give in their concerns. The idea is to make an efficient review. We have to be efficient. We have to be competent. Now, and we have to work around all these things. So it is tricky. It is not yet resolved. I'm not saying it's all resolved. We have tried to do it for a few studies. We have been successful in a few. We have not been successful in a few. So it is still a learning experience, but I think we have to invest more energy. And to add to the preparedness issue, actually, I would like to add one point here, because in most of the places, the institutions have not invested in ethics committees. So they do not have a permanent secretariat. People or members are part-time members who have other jobs and responsibilities. So it is time that we have to think of, at least like in ICMR guideline, it is mentioned that member secretaries should be given protected time. So if there is somebody, a key person who has protected time given to the ethics committee work, then we can work around all these things. We need to work hard. It's a full-time work. So, and also members who are often appointed in many ethics committees, they are by seniority and they are the busy people actually. They don't have time to give for review process. So we have to find people who are interested, who are committed, who are willing to give time, devote their energies for the review. So because it's time that we invest in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Roli. Yes, this is the time, because the ethics committees, they are dealing with the surge of research proposals, and this is a difficult situation, and the ethical issues which are posed during this pandemic, this is the time to have give them protected time so that they can do their jobs in an effective manner. So now may I go to, I have my next question for Roxana. And Roxana, one of our attendees, Devi Lina, has posed this question for you. So she would like to ask that what was the experience of consenting over phone? Any lessons learned? What was the mechanism adopted for consenting over phone? So over to you, Roxana.
Hello, and thank you very much for the question. When we think of consent by phone or electronic consent, we tend to think that it is a one-step process and that it may take away from the real message, but it is not. A consent by phone requires every single item of a printed consent because the printed consent precedes the consent by phone. The document has to be complete. It has to have all the requirements that you need for a proper consent to be approved. And that written consent is going to serve as the guideline, the script that needs to be used when discussing the consent process with the participant over the phone or over whichever method you are going to use. So that's number one. Number one is you do have a guideline, you have requirements to meet regarding uh, content, regarding voluntariness, regarding competence to consent, etc. Number two is you need to have a process. How are you going to do this? Are you going to call the participant at any time of the day, or are you going to agree with the participant on what's the best time for the participant to have enough time to be by himself, to be located somewhere where he can listen to the consent process with enough um, time and concentration in order to be able to conduct the process properly. In addition to that, the participant needs to be able to ask questions. And that also requires a certain moment in the day, a certain type of connection, etc. All of that is part of a section in the protocol that we call the enrollment process. And we want an explanation of how the consent process is going to be taken place. All of those the details that I've provided to you are part of that enrollment process. They may vary with between consent using the phone to consent using the e-consent platform, or consent that is in two steps. Consent that is provided to the participant via WhatsApp, that the participant reads, that there may be a session on video for questions and answers, but that the participant will end up coming to the site for the screening, the evaluation, and the administration of the product. But before that, there will be another in vivo consent explanation that will lead to the signature process. So the consent by phone is not just a consent by phone. It's just the way that the consent is going to be delivered to the participant or explained and discussed with the participant. There is a lot more than just that telephone call involved. And as the IRB, you want to know how much more there is and how much detail is involved and how much the investigator has thought of the way the process will be delivered. And it varies from protocol to protocol. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much, Roxana. So we have a few questions lined up. So first, I'm taking this question from John Hungu. This is a question for Dr. Dario. So how will your programs ensure monitoring of all ethical review despite having wide networks on research settings, and how this will impact in low area income in communities in sub-Saharan Africa? So Dr. Dario, I would like to have your take on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Indeed, it's a very good question. And it is one of the issues centrally in the programs that we are currently ongoing. The monitoring of ethics is something that is really important to manage also in terms of sustainability, because the ethics appropriateness of reviewing, as said by the other panelists, could vary, and this is true also in Africa, of course. So we are involving self-evaluation, and we are also reviewing this self-evaluation by third party in order to externally monitoring the quality of the ethics reviewing. And based on that, of course, we are learning also the points on which to implement actions like trainings. So the overall object of the evaluation that we are doing is exactly to monitor the ethics appropriateness in terms of procedures and guidelines. I hope to have answered to the questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dario. So if I can go to Dr. CECHR, if he can elaborate on this, it would be interesting to have his take on this as well. So over to you, Dr. CECHR. Dr. CECHR, can we have your comments on this, please? Thank you.
Well, I mean, before I answer your question directly, I think there is something that is emerging and perhaps worth us all considering, which is that perhaps the pandemic has taught us that we need to take another look at what we actually expect ethics committees to do. And what are the goals of the activities of ethics committees? On the one hand, the dominant model that we have all been employing is that we carry out ethics committees above all to ensure that, participants in research are protected and there is no abuse and all that. But we're now seeing that, the challenges actually go beyond only that. And the ethical concerns are wider. If we are able to, as it were, classify the various ethical concerns that ethics committees should really take care of, from, let's say, the ethical value of the research project in itself. These are questions that we don't usually ask. And then the procedures. And of course, recently, what is now also emerging, especially with regard to, COVID, aspects even to do with, engagement with the public, communication. All these things are coming up within the ethics of research. Now, if we're able to list out all these activities, then we can begin to classify which particular group is responsible for what. Because a lot of the duplication is because ethics committees all sit down sometimes to do exactly the same thing. But if we're able to classify the various activities, the various ethical requirements of a research project, then these can be evenly distributed. So if it is a question of community engagement, then the local ethics committees are best positioned to be able to carry out the community engagement. If it is a question of the science, and we've spoken about that, we've spoken about that earlier, so I'm not going to repeat that. But principally, with regard to some of the other points that have also been mentioned, I just wanted to say, what we really need to do is to structure the way ethics reviews work in such a way that they are not an appendix to our institutions. When Dr. Rolly was talking about how people are assigned to ethics committees in India, is the same thing in Africa, or at least in Ghana. Many people in ethics committees are professors, lecturers who have just been called, and they do this on a side basis. we need to have people more dedicated and people better qualified. And people who are actually, who have the time to be able to dedicate to this, themselves to this activity. But this requires that, the institutions that are actually promoting the, ethics committees also invest really in ethics committees and ensure that they have the capacity. And the 3 points I think, would be to ensure that they are competent and to guarantee that they are also independent. Because most of the times institutional bodies are, create ethics committees within the institution, and therefore the ethics committees cannot really operate independently because there's a lot of pressure on the ethics committees in their activities. And when we talk about equivalency, which Catherine mentioned, to be able to identify the points on which we can actually avoid duplication. So these 3 points I think are important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Caesar. And yes, we need to have initiatives to build the capacity of ethics committees. I would like to go to one of the coordinators of our working group, Sadia Zia. Sadia, we would like to have your question. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farah. And I must congratulate all the panelists and all the coordinators for their effort. And this been an effort for for last 6 months we were working and we were doing. Now we have a valuable discussion with the panelists, and we have the valuable discussion with within the question answer session. I was listening about everything, and I'm really seconding Dr. Rowley and Dr. Caesar's point about the capacity building, about the dedication, about the recruitment of dedicated people who can review the committees and who can review the things. Besides, they are only dedicated towards all these things. One of my suggestion is about for the lower middle income countries, because we do have a different scenarios. This would be my suggestion to WHO. This would be my suggestion to all the stakeholders, that the bioethics committee and the bioethics hub for WHO around the world, they are working and they are dedicated in governing the things. For the LMICs, there must be dedicated and separate things to do with, because we have a very different scenarios in our countries. Even we are neighbors, but we have different prevalence. We have different issues regarding the community. The people within the Pakistan, India, and all other LMICs, which we are taking news from the people, and we are also in touch with other experts. And what they are saying, that the people are having a very much misconceptions about the clinical trials, about the ethical issues, about the community engagement. They do not have proper information about how to engage the communities and how it is valuable to be communities among with all the trials and all the ethical reviews and issues. So this could be the thing that we can positively engage the people. And secondly, we have to identify the vulnerable communities within the populations to select them for the clinical trials. For example, for the vaccinations even, or for the vaccine trials, we need to identify the populations, the communities, and first we have to build up their trust on the organizations, on the bodies, on the regulatory bodies, that what the things would be and how it will work. So these are my suggestions. Rather, these are the things which we are facing nowadays, and beside these 9 months of lockdown, where everything was very much messy, so that these things were really highlighted. And we have to engage the people from the academic background, the medical practitioners, the doctors, nurses, paramedics, and all the the renowned and the trusted people from the communities, to give the people and the communities the trust on the organization and on the workings what we are doing. And at the end, again, I congratulate all the panelists and all the coordinators for positively bringing this session up, and people around the world. We are now at a one platform, and the Global Health Network has done their great job. Thank you so much, Dr. Farah, and all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Satya. So I would encourage all the attendees they can raise their hands so that we can go to them to take their questions. And at this point in time, I would like to ask one question, and I would like if Catherine Litter can elaborate on this. So in the current pandemic, we have seen the vulnerable groups, the concept of vulnerability has changed. The ones who are vulnerable, are they are more vulnerable, or is it right to assume that during pandemic all of us are vulnerable? So what is her take on this, and how the ethics committees can ensure that vulnerable groups are protected? Is it fair to not include them? Is it the right way? Can we assume that by not including them, we are protecting them? So I would like to have thoughts of Catherine Littrell on this, on the vulnerability during COVID-19. Thank you.
It's a great question. It's a really tricky question. I think even outside of COVID, the issue of vulnerability is a loaded issue as to how to define it. I think you raise a very good question in your question about, are we all vulnerable as a result of COVID? I think it's exposed more vulnerabilities in our society. It's probably showed where there are greater weaknesses in our systems and our structures, and exposed more people to vulnerabilities. I think your question also was about, should we include, were you saying, vulnerable populations in research? And I think that's down to a setting specific, because there are good arguments why you would and why you wouldn't, depending on the circumstances. So if you exclude certain, and it depends who you are defining as vulnerable populations, if you exclude them from research, I think then they might not gain some of the benefits. But I think identifying these populations in different scenarios and settings is very important. I mean, migrant populations and refugee populations are a great example. I think you have to take extra care. You also want to make sure at the end of the day that they are included in some of the benefits that come out of research. I think it's about how you also take the consent. Don't think you should automatically exclude on the grounds of vulnerability. I think that's a dangerous starting premise. I think how you define vulnerability is really interesting. For example, at one point in time, I think lots of people would have classified pregnant women as a vulnerable population. I don't agree with that classification, but I think you should look at your including your inclusion criteria for different types of populations and structure your trial accordingly. My premise is you don't start with an exclusion of vulnerability. I think COVID has exacerbated some vulnerabilities and shown that across the globe and across the scale. It's interesting that you'll see more vulnerable groups that you wouldn't have seen in countries like the US. It's been more effective, but groups that have socioeconomic status have been shown to be low socioeconomic status, have been shown to be more affected by COVID. So I think it has shown different types of vulnerabilities in different settings. I think we're still got a lot of way to work on. I think there's something like, on the Epidemics Ethics Network, there's something like 1,700 ethics related papers, and a good percentage of those are looking at issues around vulnerability and exclusion. There's a lot of work to be done. As I said, WHO is currently looking at the issue in relation to migrants and refugee populations, as this is a population that's often left out. But there are a lot of different populations. But I would say that if these populations came in research studies that we get at headquarters, it's not a exclusion, as you said, it's a look at the circumstances and the scenarios. An additional comment on the back of, I think, some of what's coming up in the chat that I think is really important. that I would just like to add is I do think it's really important in terms of ethics committees that we acknowledge the importance of the Secretariat and the expertise that comes with that and the knowledge accumulation. It's a really important role in a research ethics committee or an IRB as the Secretariat. They will have good knowledge of some of the applications that have come before and some of the applications, some of the issues that keep coming back to a committee. As we know, the actual committee demographics often changes. In terms of, I think, looking at who serves on a committee, I think this is an important global conversation. I think what lots of colleagues are saying is it's lots of senior members who don't often have a lot of time to devote to it. Very important, I think, that some sort of accreditation system is given to people who do devote time at their universities or wherever they are. And this is fed into their role and accredited for it. But we also look at the structure of our ethics committees. If all the applications you are getting are around data and sample sharing, is there someone in your structure that you can get to sit on that committee who has an expertise in it? It's a problem we encounter at headquarters quite a lot. So it's not just looking at the seniority, I think it's looking at that expertise across the board, I think is really important going forward. But it totally endorse what's being said by other panelists in terms of ethics research shouldn't be seen as an add-on, it should be as a fundamental of the research process. And I'll finish there.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Now I would like to go to Julio. Julio, we would like to take your question. So over to you.
Thank you, Farah. I'm really happy to be here with all of you sharing these thoughts regarding our health research ethics system. I just want to comment on that aspect that Catherine Leader mentioned about who serves at the committee. And I'm going to be very brief. I have seen in some countries that there is an exclusion of bioethics experts from the national ethics committees. It sounds crazy, I know. It sounds something that is, I believe is unusual, but it happens. At least in our sub-region in the Central America, in the Caribbean, we have observed that there are committees that don't have any guideline at all regarding research ethics. They do follow or try to follow, intend to follow international ethical guidelines, but locally, nationally, there are no locally developed guidelines or at least adapted. So I just want to point out that to this session, because I think this is one of the big issues and that we need to tackle in order to do something regarding research ethics in places where research is not really a big priority. But that is a big issue that I have been observing in certain countries where experts, bioethicists, philosophers are not part of research of national research ethics committee. And that should be bring in our conversation. Thank you, and I'm very happy to hear all of you and learning that much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julio. So I would like to ask the panel if they would like to elaborate further on the thoughts of the Julio. So the floor is open for the panelists if they would like to add their comments to this. Dr. CECHR. Dr. CECHR, you have raised your hand, so we would like to have your take on this. Thank you.
Yeah, just on the last comment made by Julio, and it's linked to what Catherine also mentioned previously. We've been discussing even with colleagues from other African countries, other than Ghana, where I come from, the idea of actually having a shared database of competencies, because sometimes there are certain projects or certain research projects that require a specific competence which the existing members of our ethics committees do not have. And if we did have a shared database whereby we know there are experts in certain fields who may not even be within our local context that we can fall on, I think that would help. And this is something that, perhaps, Catherine, being at the WHO, she can take this up. Yeah.
So, Catherine, would you like to comment on this? Does it come as one of the future initiatives of WHO? Do you think that this should be possible to do?
So I'm definitely happy to take it back and have discussions. I think it's a really interesting proposal by CECHR, and it does build on, I think, some areas where this is happening. So I think in Africa, in the human genome editing field, they have built on regional knowledge of different committees who have gone through looking at genomics to build that expertise through communities. So I think some of these models already exist, and happy to explore how to build on that. I think having a list of competencies is a really interesting one. I know one of the models that some people use for ethics review is to have a small core committee, and then they have a list of experts who they can call on particular subjects, whether it be data sharing or, for something that we're seeing a lot now in the future, adaptive trial design. So you would still have your core ethics committee, then you would bring in people when you get a protocol on that subject, and they would advise you on some of the issues, whether they be ethics, and also just to explain some of the complex science behind some of these. So I think it's definitely something we should explore, but I think there are probably different models for doing it, whether you have a regional competency level on actually sitting on ethics committees, or whether you want to draft in external experts who don't necessarily sit on ethics committees who could do this. But yeah, definitely a model that I think we should explore further. Over.
Thank you so much. So in the question and answer box, there are two comments which are pretty related to each other. So I would read them out, and I would like to have thoughts of my panelists on this. So Fernando J. Andrant has mentioned that it is clear that there are many differences among countries around the world. However, how to harmonize different approaches to face COVID-19 research and ethics. And on a similar note, Carolina from Spain has asked, what do you think about the future of global IRB that could be able to guide countries in dealing with research ethics, mostly when ethics on research are a common issue? So I would like to have comments from my panel on this. So Francis, would you like to share your thoughts on this? A concept of global IRB?
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Roxana, that would be great. Great to hear from you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you, Farah. So in regard to the global a global IRB as a body that may issue general guidance on certain ethical dilemmas, I think it would be extremely helpful. I think it could not take the role of the countries or the regions, ideas and cultures. Thus, we would still need local IRBs. However, many of these local IRBs would definitely benefit from general guidance on certain issues that is the product of the consensus of many IRBs in the world. I think the problem with the global IRB would be gather that consensus, gather the opinions, but I see a lot of potential for a body like that. And another issue that I would like to discuss on is the competence the competence of IRB members, which keeps coming up, no? What is an IRB member? What does it take to become a competent IRB member? Several of you have already said it. I think commitment is probably number one, but commitment alone doesn't do it, right? You have to invest the time. What kind of investment is this? We're talking about training. We are always learning new things or new views on how to do things. So we as IRB members continue to look for alternatives to improve our knowledge. The Global Health Network has done an amazing job at providing us with several of these opportunities, but participating in workshops such as these with worldwide views on how to do things is definitely an eye-opener for those of us in an IRB world. So we are starting with we've started with commitment, and we've moved on to training, and then as you have suggested before, an ad hoc team of experts on various types of scientific issues would definitely contribute to expand the knowledge of IRB members. So I think that that we need to make tools available for IRB members. The IRBs do not float in the air. They need institutional grounding. And as many of you have said before, sometimes we see that we feel that institutions don't really think that they have an obligation to help and support IRBs. Thank you.
I apologize. I had a little bit of trouble to unmute there, but thank you, Roxana, for jumping in, because actually I wanted to point to the example of Peru, the example of Chile and so forth, and let's say Malaysia and other places where they have, let's say, more or less taking the review for COVID-19 studies up to a national level. And Roxana and some of us discussed this very briefly in a breakout session on Tuesday. And the difficulty is the relationship between this national review and the local review, because the local review is always necessary and needed as well. I would have some hesitancy myself with a sort of global international IRB, because I would hesitate about the politicizing of ethics and the politicizing of ethical review. So I would have some real hesitancy about that. And I would rather see ways of cooperating between ethics committees within countries and across national borders. I think that's a more solid foundation on which we can build.
Thank you so much, Francis. And I believe Dr. CECHR would like to elaborate on this as further. So Dr. CECHR, over to you.
Yeah, just on the question of the, global IRB, the idea sounds interesting. However, there are some bodies that already exist. Some of the ethical the ethical committees that are advising the WHO are doing something like that anyway, because they're giving guidelines that can serve various countries in their ethical decisions with regard to COVID-19, for example. However, I also agree very much with Francis's point about the fact that the constitution and the makeup of such a body is very important, because it can actually become an instrument that feeds into certain power mechanisms that are already in existence. As we know, global health and and healthcare in general actually operate within a world structure in which there is an unbalanced level of power play. And so if a global IRB becomes too powerful, it can actually undermine or at least sway the independence of local IRBs. And I think this is important to keep in mind, whereas the idea is a good one, but we need to be very careful about this body not becoming yet another instrument of colonization of sorts.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. CECHR. So, few minutes to go, and we have a lot of questions, and I would like to invite Bonu Gosu Amara to pose their question to the panelists. So over to you, Bonu. Are you there, Bonu Gosu Amara, or?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Please, thank you very much. My appreciation also goes to all the panelists for having this wonderful discussion from day one to date. I really enjoyed. My question goes to Dr. Dario and Dr. Caesar, maybe to clarify for me. In my own case, my environment, we have a peculiar situation. We have been existing in a conflict zone for over 10 years. A number of international NGOs, non-governmental, all sort of bodies are there, checking out, extracting information from people without regard to ethical principles, such as the right for individual to take his or her own choices, acting with the best interest, do not harm principle, etc. At the end of the day, you find that you are talking to somebody who you think that have been doing things in good faith, but you find a person with not a human faith, but you end up is a person is working with the dividers, extracting information and carrying out from the people to the maybe the insurgents working for them in the name of research. And you also find that so many people have been violating this ethical issue, and the issue situation is further amplified by the current pandemic, which also wasn't the situation in the environment. What can the ethical body can do to ensure that these principles are sustained and people's right to ethical issue has been observed? Thank you. Hello?
So, Dr. CECHR or Dr. Dario, would you like to elaborate on this further?
So I'll let Dr. Dario go first.
Okay.
Yes, please, Caesar, go ahead.
Is he
Dr.
muted?
Dario, Dr. Dario, is it possible for you to share your comments on this?
Well, I prefer to leave it Caesar to talk about that because it surely has much more experience in the field than me. Thank you.
Well, in the first place, I think this is a very important question, and it leads us back to some of the considerations that have been made already about the importance of local ethics committees who actually are grounded within the context. Now, conflict zones are zones that actually require a different set of rules sometimes. And we have seen that the relationship between the research and the community is so important. I think some of these things came up, for example, during the most recent Ebola outbreak in DRC, the way the community had to be engaged because, I mean, due to the existing conflict in the area, even reactions towards research or healthcare projects were conditioned by the existing conflict. So this is a case whereby I think we really need to, as it were, increase the capacity of the local organizations who understand what is actually at stake in order to be able to operate within those zones. Because the normal rules that usually would apply, let's say in peace times, do not apply exactly the same way during a period of conflict. And in this sense, I think, some work has been done. I'm trying to, think of, the document that was prepared by the Nuffield Council talking about, research in public health emergencies. But it takes, that document also does give some amount of consideration to, taking into, or does give space to taking into consideration the local context in order to be able to operate. And I think this is a very delicate point because research is not carried out in isolation, it's carried out within a context. And where there is a conflict in that, there is a conflict in that context, we need to be able to understand the dynamics in order not to feed into what is already existing as part of the conflict.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There is a question from Rafaela in the question and answer box. I would read it out, and I would like my panelists to let me know who would like to respond to this. This is a question about the scientific soundness of research protocols during the pandemic. The COVID-19 scientific literature is evolving so rapidly with a plethora of information, including from preprints that is difficult to have an up-to-date overview of it. And this would be important to assess scientific soundness, risk-benefit, pertinence of the proposed research. How are the ethics committees dealing with this? And I would like if we could rope in research of vaccines, which is a hot topic nowadays. So with evolving scientific literature and a lot of evidence emerging on daily basis. So what is the advice from the panelists for ethics committee members to deal with the situation?
Dr. Farah, Francis, if I could start, I'm very happy for the question because, as you know, we just started a project on looking at recommendations for ethics committees when reviewing vaccine clinical trials. And as we see in the COVID situation, I think we're starting from behind the curve, if you will. We were fortunate this week to learn that we get WHO funding for that. And I think it's really important. I think there has never been a more complex period in history for vaccines. We see already now maybe 8 or 9, 10 or 11 vaccines that are pretty close to being licensed and being implemented, and very different kinds of vaccines as well. It's a huge question, how we vaccinate, how we roll out vaccines, how we roll out the studies for vaccines, and what those studies mean for the implementation of vaccination programs within particular regions or countries. So this is a critical issue, and the IRBs, the ethics committees, play and will play a critical role in this. We have to finish this project by the 31st of March. That's not much time. One could think right now, where for the ethics committees in a way, yeah, the vaccines are already there or almost there. But I think by the 31st of March, we're going to see the ethics committees confronted with many more studies and a much more complex field in which to make decisions or determinations about vaccines, not just whether this vaccine or that vaccine is safe and effective, but also how one or another vaccine would also play out within a country or a region where other vaccines are already being used. So it's a terribly complex area. And I hope that, you know, we can all sit down and think about this and figure out what it is that the ethics committee, specifically what the ethics committees must do in order to address this really difficult situation, I think.
Thank you, Francis. So yes, I would agree that the difficulty in this scenario. So building on this, I would like to ask that for vaccine research, especially, we need to go to healthy volunteers. We need to have them. So in fact, there are two areas that I would like to cover in the last few minutes of this discussion. One thing, what is the role of ethics committees in reviewing the community engagement strategies, and how to ensure that there is no therapeutic misconception, and when we are reaching out to the communities, we give them up-to-date information. And this is a bit tricky because we are inviting them to participate, but we are not sure about, not fully sure about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines which are currently under investigation. So this becomes quite tricky. So at this point in time, I would also like to ask the panel, have we done a good job in engaging the communities during this pandemic? So the information for vaccine research for the potential participants in the community, and second question, have we done a good job in engaging the community during this pandemic? I would like the panel to respond to this. I'm looking forward to hear you. Catherine, would you like to elaborate on this, to respond to this? You would need to unmute yourself.
Yep, sorry, I have done. I was waiting for the host to do it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a critical question about, we've seen the infodemic, the amount of information that has come out to communities across the globe. And I think people have been overwhelmed by it, also overwhelmed by misinformation. And I think there's a lot of work going on at the moment to correct some of that misinformation. I think in terms of vaccine and vaccine research and vaccine rollout of programs, a lot more information is needed. We need to be clear between where it's a vaccine trial, where it's a vaccine rollout. Some of these are complex issues. So I think we've still got a long way to go, would be my answer. I think there are some good models. I think some good models are being developed. I think there's the good participatory practice guidance that was developed on the back of, I think 2016, I think was developed, has now been updated for the COVID outbreak. And I know that colleagues are looking into the implementation of that guidance in relation to vaccine trials. But the bottom line, I think, is we as a community have still got a long way to go. And the onus is on all of us as the global research and health community to do this and to get out there and get the messaging clear. Because there is the possibility of losing trust and faith if we don't get it right. And I think it's critically important. Over.
Thank you, Catherine. So may I go to Dr. Roli Mathur here. Dr. Roli, in your presentation, I was so happy to see that you have incorporated one document titled Community Engagement and Protection. So I would like to hear from you that what are the strategies that you are following for community engagement? So Dr. Roli, it would be great to have your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much. And we very well realize the importance of engaging with the communities. And it's a tricky thing to do. It's not that easy. It sounds easier, but to actually implement it in practice is not that easy. So what we suggest to the researchers is that they need to engage with the communities to understand what are the needs of the community right at the time of inception of the study. So to have So these are some suggestions that are there in the guidelines that are there already. I mean, not related to COVID alone, but before that as well. That when a research is going to be done in a community, it is better to have a representative from the community be part of the research team, so as to have a better understanding of their needs and desires and how it can be best implemented. So once you have them on board, one is that the suggestions would go into building the proposal, and for the ethics committee to have invited experts or members, members of the community to be invited into the committee at the time of review is another approach. There are also suggestions about having community advisory boards which are formed for particular research studies. For example, for COVID, I don't have an example, but when we did some HIV research, we had community advisory boards where we had actual patients on board who gave their inputs. Then the next thing is that these ethics committees, when they invite these members on board, have these into consideration. And these inputs will go a long way. And even when the research is over, in order to translate back the findings or to translate back the outcomes of the study, this engagement with community will play a long way in actually getting it back to the community, because doing a research and we believe that it's not goes up to the publication, but it has to be translated back to the community. And therefore it's more and more important that we engage with communities. However, there are challenges and there is a lot more investment that is needed from the researchers in doing so. But the ethics committee have to work hand in hand with the researchers and to support that and to educate them the need and importance for doing so. So it is not a one-way system. It has to go hand in hand by both the parties have to think about doing it in the most rightful manner, as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rowley. And we all agree that this is the time of having a coordinated, a synchronized response. And learning from this, we have to find the opportunities to develop synergies to have a better system in place so that we can efficiently do the job. We need to build the capacities of ethics review committees. We may need to share the capacities so that there are ethics review systems, there are countries who are lagging behind in spite of all the initiatives which are currently undergoing, so that they can come up, they can deal with the situation in a better manner. They can have the benefit of the experience and the learning of others. So we need to unite our hands, we would agree. So we have discussed the challenges, we have discussed the solutions, but we conclude that there is a long way to go. When this pandemic hit us, we were not prepared. The work from previous emergencies has already taught us that we need to prepare for the emergencies, in between the emergencies. But unfortunately, when this COVID-19 hits us, we were not well prepared. We have started to respond. We have started to prepare, but certainly there are areas and where we need to have a better clarity. We need to have a more efficient and a more coordinated response. So what a wonderful discussion, and what the wonderful questions that we have from our attendees. We may not have taken all of those questions. I have tried to take the questions on themes so that we do not miss out. But if we have not answered any of the questions, we can request our panelists. Maybe they can directly answer, or we can try to answer those following this workshop, because we are limited by time here. So here I would like to thank everyone for participation in this workshop. And our sincere thanks to the panelists for sharing their time and expertise on such an important and globally topical issue. The recording of this session, along with additional material, will be shared through a link by email. We would be grateful if you could complete the evaluation form for this workshop. We are sharing the link for this in the chat now, and this will also be shared by email. Could we also warmly encourage you all to visit Coronavirus Hub on the Global Health Network for more details of the working groups established to support our research response to COVID-19 and to review the resources and materials available, as well as further upcoming opportunities that will be made available. The team will share the links in the chat and in the follow-up email to you. All that is left for me is to share my thanks for all the fantastic panelists, to the attendees for joining and for their valuable contribution, to the breakout session, to the question and answer sessions. And we have evolved throughout the program. It is my pleasure to be your chair for this workshop. And on behalf of the Global Health Network, we were delighted to host you all. We look forward to seeing you at future sessions. So here I would like to invite Bonnie Baker. So if she would like to share her closing remarks with all of us. Bonnie, over to you.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic. And as we're now coming to the conclusion of this session, on behalf of the Global Health Network, a sincere thank you to Dr. Farah Asif for chairing and presenting as part of the two-day workshop. We had an incredibly insightful series of presentations, very engaging and offering much opportunity for attendee participation and interaction to serve this virtual format. A heartfelt thank you as well to all our panelists and coordinators, whom alongside Farah are all very valued members of the network. And it really is our absolute pleasure to work with all of you. Thank you also to all our participants for joining us across the 2 days and for your very valuable contributions. It was our pleasure to host you. And the team have been sharing some links with you in the chat box just to navigate to the Coronavirus Hub, which Farah mentioned. Please do explore the hub, which features and signposts to a lot of the available resources and the free skills training courses which have been mentioned, and where we will also post and position the recording of this workshop and all of the associated materials. If you'd like to, please also sign up and join the COVID-19 working groups, which are led and coordinated by senior experts, many of whom we've been very fortunate to hear from as organisers and presenters of this workshop. And we will also send all attendees an email inviting you to complete the workshop evaluation, for which we'll include the links to the hubs and resource pages as well. So from the team here, enjoy the rest of your day, and we really look forward to welcoming you again soon. So stay safe, take care, and thank you very much, everyone.